this week, May 6th to May 12th, was designated Deaf Awareness Week for 2024, which is a significant time dedicated to increasing public understanding of deaf culture, history, and the challenges faced by the deaf community. Here in Nigeria, the plight of those with hearing challenges is usually discussed alongside issues affecting other special persons because of the similarities of experiences in society, which continues to demonstrate less and less care. This week encourages individuals and organizations to participate in activities that promote better communication and greater inclusivity. Now, joining us is to discuss this message and how people in that bracket can be better protected in Nigeria is Toyosi Alexis Badejo Okusanya, a deaf inclusion consultant. It is great to have you on the morning show, Toyosi.
Thank you for having me. I'm
Good
so
morning,
happy
Toyosi.
to be here.
Good to have you.
So I want to start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself because you are deaf, right?
Yes.
So how has it been for you growing up in Nigeria as a deaf person, and what have you had to, what would you advise the public to do in terms of inclusivity for deaf people like yourself?
So good morning, everyone. I was diagnosed with severe hearing loss at the age of 4, and I was raised and born in Nigeria. And growing up, there was this negative perception of deaf people, that deaf people need healing. And so I feel like it had to do with the negative perception of disabilities in Nigeria. So for a while, my mom would take me to pastors, to pray for me, to seek healing. And I feel like for a long time, I lived life in search of purpose, but only when I was able to have that miraculous healing story. And so eventually I moved to the UK, and then I met other deaf people, and I feel like that had a significant impact on my perception of my disability, because after that I started, feeling seen and talking to other people who have lived the same experiences as me. So that is basically my story. And also, I was also bullied in Nigeria in school, and it's quite crazy, like looking back, not knowing that this would be who I am today. And so it's so important to me to shape that perception, because growing up, I didn't have anyone who looked like me, who was young, who liked the things that I did, and was also doing other things as well. A lot of people often shied away from, telling other people that they were disabled or they're deaf. So they will actually often just hide it in corporate spaces, in government spaces. And so creating awareness for this is really important for me. So that's what I would say about my story.
All right, seriously, that's a good one. Thanks for setting the tone for the conversation with your own story. And I know that you still speak about the Awareness Week, but I think it is important, especially for our viewers, even for me, because I do not have so much knowledge about this type of area. I think some clarity will be important when you refer to yourself as a deaf person, is there a difference between a deaf and somebody with hearing impairment? And at what did a medical miracle happen to you in the UK that you're able to hear me now, if you know what I mean?
So in terms of, sorry, you said the difference between being deaf and having a hearing impairment.
Yes.
So I think they're basically the same thing,
They're
but
the same thing?
Some people would actually refer to it as having hearing loss as opposed to having a hearing impairment. So there are different levels of deafness. So some people have severe hearing loss, some people have profound, and deaf people communicate either through spoken English or sign language, whether British Sign Language or American Sign Language. I know American Sign Language is quite popular in Nigeria.
Yes.
And then your second question was about a medical miracle.
Yes. So
you're wearing hearing aids right now.
You're wearing hearing. Exactly. That was where it was.
Okay. Yes. So that's very important. I'm glad you actually asked that, because I think it's also very important to highlight the fact that not many people have access to assistive technologies that would help them. And so I remember when I was growing up, my mom actually took me to London and they ran hearing tests and then they fitted me with hearing aids. But I feel like not everybody in Nigeria has the opportunity to have access to that. And I think that's a major issue. You know, when I was doing a lot of research, the World Health Organization actually predicts that by 2030, more than 2.5 billion disabled individuals will require assistive technologies, but 1 billion of them will lack it. And so I think that's due to poverty. I think that's due to financial barriers. I think that's also due to awareness and understanding. A lot of people actually blame the reason why disabled people don't have access to certain things, whether medical help. They blame it on disabilities, but I think the issue is society, the way society is set up. There are barriers in society that prevent disabled people from being able to access these things.
So this is basically what the Deaf Awareness Week is about,
yes,
to change the narrative.
Yes.
How involved are you in this activity?
So I've actually been doing this for a couple of years now, probably since I was maybe 16, 15. I feel like the main way I do it is through the art of storytelling. And so I think through sharing my stories, other people have actually gained the confidence to also come out and share their stories. I am involved in an organization called Sign Health. It's one of the largest organizations that employs deaf people in the UK. And we basically discuss campaign issues. We try to figure out how to better represent the deaf community in different aspects of society, whether the corporate space, whether healthcare, because you find that people go to, for instance, the doctors, and some people might not communicate through spoken English and might request a sign language interpreter, but then they don't have access to that. They're telling them that they're not able to provide that. So through that, we're able to speak more about these issues and better represent the people. I also consult brands and organizations on how to better include deaf people in their company strategies, whether marketing strategies, because an issue that a lot of companies and brands and organizations face is that they want to represent disabled people sometimes, but they're afraid that it will ruin like the aesthetic of you know, their brand and you know how they would like their shows or their projects to be represented.
So I want to talk about that because you know, without your hearing aids and without your technology, you're completely deaf. You can't hear at all, right?
Yes.
And you, I believe, had worked in a school here before, and we're trying to raise money for children here to be able to access hearing aids. So, like, how much of a financial burden can this be, especially, you know, in Nigeria? Like, how much of a financial burden can it be to be deaf or have hearing loss?
I think it's a major thing because when I did go to the school, back Wesley School for the Deaf, back in January 2020, and I spoke to them, and one of the things they mentioned is that a lot of them don't have access to assistive technologies. So hearing aids, cochlear implants, they're different things that deaf people use. They're different spectrums of deafness. Each person will require something different. And one thing they mentioned was that they don't have the money to be able to afford hearing aids. So some people can afford it, but for the majority of them, they often are just taught sign language, which isn't a bad thing. I think that's great. I think, you know, people should have the choice to be able to choose what way they would like to communicate. I would also say something, though. When also researching and speaking to them, one thing that we spoke about was just the perception of sign language. And so growing up, we would have schools in Nigeria that are referred to as the school for the deaf and dumb. And so it changes your perception of who you are as a deaf person, because from a very young age, you're taught to believe that there are limitations and a cap on what you can achieve, what you can do. So this spreading awareness for this is really important to me.
All right, Toyosi, let me ask you two questions. First is about the Awareness Week. How involved is the Office of the Disability in Lagos State. I know a bit about it, and I know that that's an office that has been deployed in the past, to good causes. How involved are they in this advocacy? And secondly, again, is to seek clarity and education, if you like, as to, because you made reference to a word healing, like taking you to, at that time. Is it every level of deafness or hearing impairment that hearing aid can correct?
No.
No?
No. So that's why some people would often have sign language as their first language of communication. Not every deaf person can speak. Most people actually sign. Some people do. Some people prefer to sign. Some people prefer to speak. So it really just depends. And then to answer your first question, in Nigeria, I wouldn't be able to speak to every single thing that the Office of the Disabilities in Lagos has achieved till today, because I'm not really involved in that. But one thing I will say is that with regards to disabilities in Nigeria, when people think of disabilities in Nigeria, they think of physically disabled people. And we don't really shed light on invisible disabilities. So for instance, I was in an Uber last week, and I was trying to transfer money to the account, like to the driver, in Nigeria, and I was asking him to repeat himself. I think I asked about 4 times, and he got so frustrated and irritated, and I had to mention, oh, I'm deaf, and you have me pulling my hair back to show my hearing aids, and be like, I can't hear you, could you please speak up? So I think that not much light is shed on invisible disabilities. So people who...
How did that gentleman react?
He was a bit taken aback. Yeah, he was actually a bit taken aback. But he mellowed after that, which was quite nice. But yeah, that's what I would say.
You spoke about people having different languages. Did you do speech therapy? Did you do sign language? Like, how, as a child, was that like the additional things you had to do in order to make life a little bit easier for yourself?
Yeah, so I actually did speech therapy from, I think, about the age of 5. I finished when I was like maybe 11 or 10, which not many people have access to. So back in the UK as well, not many people had access to speech therapy. And also here, I feel like sign language was kind of, the perception around it wasn't really great back then. So I resorted to speech therapy. But looking back, if I was to go back in time, I wish I had the option to do both at the same time and decide for myself which way I would like to communicate. But obviously, I am the only deaf person in my nuclear family. So everybody's mode of communication is spoken English. So you would have deaf people who grow up in a deaf family, so that will be helpful because they will be able to all communicate in sign language. But then when you grow up in a hearing family, it's a very different space. So that's why I would say like everybody's deafness is completely different. Not everyone has the same story and the same way of communication.
Yeah.
All right, Toyosi, I know you're also a beauty content creator, right? How's that aspect of your life, and what would be your words of advice to physically challenged people who are gifted, but then they tend to see support more for physically or physically disabled people in sports than in the creative sector? What would be your advice to them and to government, for example?
My advice to them would be to own their stories, because no one can toot your horn or tell your story better than you do. And the minute you start living for yourself and for that audience of one, which for me is God, no one can take that away from you because it's your story. And the most important thing that you need to realize is that when people have negative things to say about something, it's because they see that light, right? And so I think back to like how many years ago, had I listened to the people in my secondary school who would, make fun of the way I pronounce certain words, because growing up I would struggle to pronounce certain words, then I wouldn't be who I am today. It gets to a point where you have to move past what other people have to say about you, or what you think people have to say about you, and to own yourself. And it doesn't just have to be in the disability space. Like I love makeup. I love to work with brands. I love, like, that's my passion. Yeah. And so me doing this is me also showing that, yes, I have a disability, but I can also do all of these other things, because people think because you're deaf, you can't do this, you can't be in these certain spaces. And then in terms of my advice to government, I would say that the government should partner more with disability advocacy groups. Yeah. They should set up focus groups. They should invite technology experts into these spaces to be able to advise on, for instance, their websites, whether, the information there is even readable. Because when researching, I found that a lot of disabled people know that they're in Nigeria, know that there are resources available, but they can't even read the information. Oh. For instance, blind people.
Yeah.
You can't access the information. So I think government needs to partner with the people who have these lived experiences to come into these spaces and to be able to advise on strategies, which is the most important thing for me.
Great.
Yes. Well,
Great.
Thank you so much, Toyosi, Badejo, Okusanya. I guess your bullies will have to watch you on TV this morning, which is a great time for them, and it's been a joy having you on the show.